Well, what the states are doing is they are finding ways to supervise and monitor low-level nonviolent offenders. You know, prisons are important and they are necessary, but you have to remember that prisons are places for people that we're scared of, not people that we're mad at. So you take people who are low-level nonviolent offenders and you find ways to appropriately supervise them through probation, through parole, through better drug courts, through electronic monitoring, a whole host of ways that keep them in the community rather than behind bars. It's far less expensive. I could tell you that in Texas, for example, locking an offender up for one day costs about $50, but having that offender on probation costs a little over $3. It's a huge difference, and it's a difference we're probably willing to pay when it comes to a murderer or a rapist. But when it comes again to a low-level drug offender, maybe a youth who is caught with marijuana, one who stole something out of his next-door neighbor's garage, maybe someone who's bounced checks. People like that will often come out of prison even worse than they started. And we have to be careful about how we treat those kinds of offenders.
So what is your group proposing then?
Well, what we're proposing is taking funding that would be going into very heavy-handed incarceration, instead putting a portion of that into improving probation, improving drug courts, improving all of these important community supervision techniques.
And is this gaining traction on the federal level?
Yes, I think it's gaining traction at the federal level because it has been so successful at the state level. There's this old quote from the Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis who said, more or less in a famous opinion, that the states are laboratories of democracies, that they should learn from one another's best practices. But it's also true that the federal government can learn from the state's best practices. And the federal government has looked at states like Texas, like Georgia, Ohio, Pennsylvania. Just this past week, actually, Mississippi and Kentucky all have passed very, very significant, far-reaching criminal justice reforms. And I think that the federal government is now saying if the states can do this, there's no reason that we shouldn't be able to do it also.